My name is Santosh Abraham. I'm the co-founder of Datagram. We have a mobile application that helps NGOs collect, manage, and monitor field data. This particular session, titled Retail Fundraising for Strategies for 2021, is part of our capacity building initiative for the community. So this is something that we hope at the end of the session is going to be really beneficial for you to plan your next year. It's only fair to say that fundraising isn't easy, okay? And donors often come with their own preferences. Corporate money usually follow trends. It depends on their strategies, and it keeps on moving accordingly. Retail money, on the other hand, is what we have seen is much more resilient, and a structured approach of engaging your donors can help your organization build a steady stream of revenue. Maybe but however, many organizations do shy away from retail, fundraising, probably because it's hard or complex. That is the perception. So to help us decode this landscape and help you plan your next year better, we have Lipika Sharma from Child Rights in You, right? George Aikara from United Way Mumbai, Reena Soni from Oxfam India, and Sachin Singh from Team Streets Fundraising Solutions. So these guys are all, you may know them already. They are pioneers in the field of fundraising, and we are looking forward to an insightful and interactive conversation. Okay, so that we are able to really get to what we want from this particular session. A quick note about the session. Each expert will be sharing their experiences and in this particular sector and what they have been doing. Um, as I mentioned earlier, all of you will be over the next 10 minutes. We moved on to the status of a panelist, which means this is going to be more of an interaction rather than it being a monologue from our end. Feel free to engage, to share your experiences, to ask questions. However, let it be as structured as possible. Use the unmute yourself only to talk. Otherwise, the background noise might disturb the other audience. Use the chat box as openly and freely as possible. Having said this, I think I would like to, without much further ado, introduce our first expert speaker, Sachin Singh. Sachin is a co-founder and CEO of Team Street Fundraising Solution. He's got over 18 years of experience in retail fundraising and mobilization across a broad range of NGOs, both international as well as local. Uh, so he's a person who's moved ground up. So he started off as a face-to-face fundraiser in the streets of Mumbai and worked up the ladder over the years. And he served in many leadership positions and has been key in developing the individual giving space for all the organizations he's worked for. He recently co-founded Team Street Fundraising Solution, which is focusing on helping not-for-profits become more financially stable through retail fundraising. So Sachin, over to you, and looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Santosh, and thank you, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Uh, so I've spent about 18 years doing fundraising, and mostly it has always been individual fundraising. When I started my journey, I was also not sure that why would people on the street, a common person who has no idea about charity, non-governmental organizations, or the organization that you're representing, why would somebody stand on the street, listen to you, and be willing to give you a monthly donation? But I was surprised to see that it worked. People were happy to spend time with a complete stranger. They were happy to give their time to listen to what your charity was doing. And on the top of it, they were also willing to shell out money from their bank account on a monthly basis to the charity, because and they felt happy doing that, because in the day-to-day time that they spend, they don't get the opportunity to do something good. So this is their way of feeling that satisfaction that, okay, fine, I did something good. It was a meaningful conversation. And I'm happy that I'm doing something from my side apart from my 9 to 5 job. So retail giving has been, so I work with Greenpeace, Amnesty as well, these two organizations. And the focus has mostly been how individuals who pay a monthly amount of money to an organization, how that can benefit a great deal. So I'll just give you a very, I mean, and of course it is quite resource intensive. So classic example is the previous organization where I worked for, where it had to shut down because of whatever reasons. I'll not get into that. But, from zero, it went up to, there were 10,000 people willing to give 700 rupees a month to a charity which was working on human rights. And I think sometimes what people feel is that these are people who are like hardcore activists, who believe very strongly in the human rights space, who have studied about that subject. But these are people who are maybe an IT professional. There were also people who were as clerks, maybe making less money than the fundraiser would be doing on the street, but still willing to shell out that contribution. And what I've realized is that even though the organization shut down, there were 10,000 people when their debit could not take place. They reached out saying that why my money was not debited. And that's the kind of commitment that comes from people when they are into the cause and when there is a nice donor journey. What I've also realized over the last few years is that the sector in India, retail giving, I mean, there was a recent study by Give India where they interviewed about 450 respondents, and it was surprising to see that even during the COVID times, it's where people were going through a really tough time, 84% of them, they said they were willing to increase their donation to charities in India. And a couple of years back, there was also one study which was everyday giving by Satwa. What it did was that we got about close to 34,000 crores as donations from individuals in the country, but majority of them, 90% of that went to religious and community related causes. So what it tells us is that in a country like India, the power of people is huge. And I think what needs to be done is we need to tap into the resource. Imagine a 10,000, 20,000 strong community of people funding your charity and giving that on a month-on-month basis. Even during the COVID or the 2008 recession, a lot of charities went through a lot of trouble because they were dependent on quite a few foundations, corporates, and did not have a very strong regular donor base. But what I also studied is globally, organizations who had a very strong individual donor base, they were able to survive the recession time and also the COVID time. So the last year, out of the 10,000 donors that the previous organization where I worked for, where we had, the attrition of these donors did not spike. It was the same as it was in 2019. So this whole thing where you feel that people are going to leave you, a lot of donors, your cash flow management becomes so much more stable, and you become so much more stronger because the access to unrestricted funding has been one of the biggest challenges that a lot of organizations face, where they don't have enough unrestricted funds to utilize for areas of work which they feel is absolutely important. But you might not get that window or the flexibility or the freedom to use it when you're raising money from, maybe a corporate or a foundation where it is project specific. So my learning has been very clear. While I know that it is sometimes human resource intensive, but it is very important that we create a mix where you keep adding that individual donor into your system, whether you do it through face-to-face, whether you do it through online, whether you do it through DRTV, whether you do it through telemarketing. There are multiple ways through events. There are multiple ways through which you can get individual people to come and join your organization. But I think it is important to start somewhere. The Everyday Giving report by Satwa also focused on this very strong point that most of the non-profits, they look for something in retail giving when they are facing challenges in other strands of work. Wherever there is a crisis that we are facing. So you look for other avenues. Okay, what is the other ways through which we can raise more money? But I think retail giving, I personally feel that it should be a part of your fundraising strategy, no matter how big or small it is. But a time, effort, and energy needs to be invested in building this space, because this will give you the independence and strength that no other channel can give. And I think there were glaring examples in 2020 when you could see a lot of posts on social media about the amount of money that we have been able to raise from individuals. Give India was able to increase their funds. I think they registered 5 times growth in comparison to what they did in 2018. So I think I personally believe that there is huge potential as far as retail giving is concerned in India, especially because of the kind of, we are a country of 1.3 billion people, an insane amount of people in the middle class who can afford to go to a shopping mall, spend thousands of rupees. And I think that's where we need to understand who are these people, how do we find them, how do we tap them, what channel do we use, but get them into your system and ensure that you keep building this pool, because this will help you plan your cash flows better. It will help you to a big amount of unrestricted funds, which is very useful to an organization. So that's something from me, and if there are any more questions, I'll be happy to answer. But my expertise in area or as a personal face-to-face fundraiser, it has been quite interesting, where the focus has been on getting people on board who will pay you a monthly amount of money. And that has really worked. So at least the organizations where I worked in the past. And currently my role is a little different. First time I'm representing myself as a founder of a company, but otherwise I have worked in the NGO over the last 18 years. So my DNA is quite strongly ingrained in how an organization functions, thinks, reporting to the board, convincing the board about this fundraising strategy that you're going to do, why you want to invest in this. But this is a strong space where everybody needs to come on board and start investing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sachin. If you have any questions, please feel free. Okay, Kapil has a question. Kapil, please feel free to ask. Yeah.
Thank you, Santosh. Very good afternoon to all the panelists and Datagram team for giving this opportunity to learn from the experts, I would say. Sachin, very wonderfully you have put in the importance of retail fundraising. I represent Vibha, which is a US-based organization, and we are into India in operations. As of now, we do not raise much of funds from Indian landscape, and most of the funding comes from the US donors. So in fact, this term retail fundraising, I would admit that this is a new term for me, because I'm very new. I'm just 2.5 months old into the social sector, in the development sector. So if you can help me out with some guidance as to where do I begin my lessons of retail fundraising, because I am able to connect to the point where you said that it is definitely much more reliable in long term, and somehow I feel organizations are not able to fully leverage the potential that we as a 1.3 billion strong country that we have. So towards that, I would request if you can help me with your guidance to where to begin with.
Yes, thank you, Kapil, for that question. I mean, it will take a good amount of time and effort to understand first what the organization is doing, the cause you represent, and who are the stakeholders, based on which we will have to create a plan that might work for your organization. So I would say that as far as reading about retail giving is concerned, there is enough material out there. You can engage, have a one-on-one conversation with people. But when you're building a retail giving strategy, I think it is important to sit together, spend maybe a day or two, to just figure out the kind of resources that are available to your organization, the cause that you represent, and what is the best channel that you can at least start a pilot test. Whether you want to do it in-house, whether you want to outsource it to an agency, all that will depend based on the kind of resources that are there at your disposal. And also what would work based on the work that your organization does. So not that simple, maybe 2-3 line answer. It will take some time to figure that out.
Thank you so much, Sachin.
Sure, and anyone who wants to chip in can do it in case. Yeah.
So I would like to come in here. So Kapil, it is very important for all of us also to understand that when we are embarking on this journey of retail fundraising, first being very clear ourselves as fundraisers, and also very clear with our board and the management that it is going to be a resource intensive investment that you are going to do. So once that is clear at your end, I think the first step for you should be, Kapil, write down why should somebody, a retail investor, support you. Write down your case for support. Once you are clear about what is that support you are asking, then try to find out who is the target audience. Who are the ones who are going to resonate with that cause? Basis that, once you are clear with what is your value proposition, who is your target audience, then you get into this step whether you're going to find them online or whether you're going to find them, through face to face. So that is the step I feel that you should be taking in case you have not ventured into this journey so far.
Thank you so much, Reenaji, for the wonderful input that you gave me.
Thank you, Sachin. I have one more question. I think what you actually mentioned, that the contribution from individuals have increased is inherently, it's something that is there in our DNA, right? Coming and stepping in and helping people when it's in need. I'm not talking, it's a human nature. I think that is where retail engagement works really, really well. So the other question that we had is, obviously, do you think if an organization builds a fundraising team, what is the right approach? Is it should you incentivize your fundraisers, your top fundraisers, or if you were to get some sort of an external support, what sort of money what is the right approach in terms of like invest within the organization or look for outside support? I know you did mention that it all depends on the organization and there are various other factors, but broadly, do you have some sort of a thumb rule? I mean, around how to motivate the team, both outside, internal and external? And this question is for anyone who wants to kind of chip in, but yeah.
So the previous two organizations that I worked for, they had in-house fundraising team, and it was like a big setup, about 100 plus people working across 5 cities doing fundraising. And I think whether you are doing fundraising in-house or whether you're doing it through an agency, the most important thing of running a successful fundraising program is people and people alone. You might have amazing strategy, excellent processes, systems in place, amazing CRM. All that will go for a toss if you have got if the team composition doesn't work. So I think keeping the team, where they are learning, there is some kind of value add that is being given. So I would say that my learning that I did not get from the entire 15, 20 years of my schooling, I got while working with organizations. So that's the kind of exposure I got as a fundraiser, which I did not expect that I would get anywhere else. So I would say that what I was when I started as a face-to-face fundraiser and what I am now, the development sector had a huge role to play in that transition. So investing in your people is absolutely a big must. Don't just treat the fundraisers as a money-making machine. Invest in them, respect them, and also have a clear-cut trajectory of growth, not only in terms of hierarchy and money, but in terms of what they would learn and the kind of exposure they can get. Just to give you a quick example, the previous organization shut down in September last year, 2020. We had a team of about 100 people. There are 60 of us who started the company together with zero cash flow, zero investment. And the team has been together for the last 4 or 5 months without getting paid a proper salary, but still sticking together purely because they enjoyed working with each other and they want to see this through. So I feel that most of the organizations, wherever you would see a successful fundraising program, the credit would be, of course, the people who are working on the ground and how they are being led. So that plays a very important role. Otherwise, you somehow, so the issue is not with the channel of fundraising. The issue is always about how do you run that channel. That's been my learning personally. Over to you guys.
I had a question, if I may. Sorry, Reena, go ahead first.
So just wanted to add one thing, that to what Sachin has said, I think what is really important is for all these people, those who are fundraising, to be passionate about the cause. So the reason I feel that why Sachin and 60 of his team members stick together because somewhere deep down they care about human rights. That is something that resonates with them. So I think this passion, that is very important, and very, very important that they are given exposure to the programs or the work that is being done, so that when they are talking to a prospective donor, they are able to sell their complete, the program to them. So I would say, if you are able to convert these fundraisers into campaigners, I think that's what Sachin and his organization, the past two organizations that he has been able to work with, that has been, I feel, the success story, turning these fundraisers into campaigners who are passionate about their work, and investing in training them on the work and building that knowledge.
Thank you, Reena. Sneha, you were asking something?
Yes, hi. Hi, this is Sneha. I am working with Johnson Sahas. This question is to not specifically to Sachin, but anyone who wishes to answer it. Is that so? I have been in conversations with the board here at my organization. We do not have an IFR unit in our organization. I'm really struggling hard to set it up because the vision that requires to set it up is something that just sits with me, I feel. So for me, if the experts here probably can just guide us in terms of telling us how do we convince the board? So what is it that actually motivates? So I heard a lot of things right now, but what is it that is one factor that will help me also convince the board A? And also in terms of the break even, because I understand the cost ratios are definitely going to be different in the IFR case, the retail fundraising case. So the break even is a question again, and how do you actually convince anyone to actually have an IFR unit in a system like as big as the organization as Jan Sahas or any other big organization? So yeah.
So okay, I'll answer, or in case anybody else, because I've been would like to go ahead. George or Lipik, anybody? Okay. So Sneha, I feel that it is, even for for organizations like smaller organizations, the individual fundraising, like as I said, retail fundraising is very resource intensive business. So I think first way to go it is maybe to start with, to test waters and to know how it is working. First is outsource it to an agency, give them your mandate, negotiate the fee with them. That is step one. And then secondly, once there are some things which are coming across from that challenge, you will have a case to take to your board. So maybe get some small amount sanctioned to conduct a small pilot where you show them, and you also for your own self see what is working, and I think build on that as a case for support, because boards will definitely be a little wary of this because it is very resource intensive. And I feel another thing that we all have to look at in businesses is we have to look at, I feel, of a combination of one-time giving and regular giving. There are not many organizations who have been successful in building a regular giving portfolio, because it's a very resource intensive portfolio. Not only does it require that you get donors, but before you venture into regular giving, you also have to fix the entire back end in place, because the cost of acquiring these donors is very high. So sometimes we see that it is like a leaking bucket, though you are able to acquire, but because your retention channel and the back end systems are not in place, whatever you acquire, they keep falling down. So these are some things that we all need to be very, very cautious out, not get very gung-ho immediately, because I have seen this at Oxfam. It's a struggle to build a regular giving portfolio. It takes a while to build that. So if it can be balanced with single giving, regular giving, and for smaller organizations, etc., please experiment it by with an agency which is a good agency. So maybe Sachin can, Sneha, help you here.
Right. Sure. Thank you, Reena. I think that is the idea of starting it, because in-house is something that is a very huge commitment also. right? Especially when you're starting. So I think I'll also thank you so much, Reena, for reflecting on that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Sneha. I think we'll take the questions in a bit. We'll move on to Lipika. So Lipika is the general manager with Child Rights in You, right? And overlooks their US operations, both from individual as well as the institutional partnership. She has 17 years of experience in this sector and has successfully launched many new channels of revenue within CRY America, and also built key accounts with corporates in US. Apart from building the donor base through networking, yeah, mail marketing and telecalling, she's also successfully launched few fundraising galas across New York, San Diego, San Francisco, Houston, etc., and raised almost close to $1 million. She's also introduced the concept of auction as a source of fundraising. So a lot of innovative innovative fundraising strategies being deployed there. And given that CRY is a huge organization, it'll be very interesting to understand, as to how the organization has managed to keep the donor engaged during these times, and how is because COVID would have changed the whole approach towards retention of donors. So it'll be great to hear your insights around that as well, and of course your international perspective. So over to you.
Thank you, Santosh. Yeah, I'm pretty excited, and I heard Sachin and Reena, and so I wanted to kind of, because it was an after lunch session, and to keep people awake, I just wanted to do a session where I would do a lot of storytelling, maybe a two storytelling, and then because you all are in the field of fundraising, I want, in fact, I want you to find out a defect in this example that I'll place in front of you, to then gauge and actually exercise your brains to figure out what went right and what went wrong, just to give you an idea about how we are thinking while we are doing fundraising, which is a very standard procedure of thinking the way we do fundraising, and especially with our designations in the nonprofit sector. Oh, I am a CEO. Oh, I am a GM. Oh, I am this, and this is telecalling is not my job. The telecallers who are employed at 15,000 rupees per month, it's their job to do it. No. Those realities are no longer a reality, and 2020 actually taught us that you need to be more flexible as an individual, and you need to be there for more you need to challenge yourself. So I'll come from a perspective of giving you one example, and please listen to this carefully. So there was this study done by Stanford University, where they were working on issues of how to treat malnutrition and how to curb malnutrition in certain areas of Vietnam and all these other locations. While they were doing it, they had a lot of data points. They were doing a lot of analysis through data, and they came to some conclusion. Yeah. When they came to some conclusion and they applied that conclusions, like for example, the outreach has to be better. People need to be more warned about the ill effects of malnutrition. Pregnant mothers need to be taught how to, feed children and stuff like that. Those researchers were taken into account, and people kind of went out and experimented that, and the result was still that malnutrition figures were not exceptionally great, like in terms of eradication, right? So now the next question is, where did we go wrong? What did we not capture or did not see, and therefore what we should do? Then one set of the Stanford students went into a certain province of Thai Pao, which is a location in Tokyo, where they researched the very poorest of the poor families and their eating habits. Yeah, they went and did that. When they did that research, they found out they are simply very poor. They only have paddy fields and sweet potatoes to feed. But why are their kids so healthy and really nourished, while in other countries, which are better than this Thai province, is doing so miserably? So what would you guess would be the finding? What would you think could have been the finding that data did not capture?
That the parents in these provinces were very particular to ensure that whatever they are offering to their children, they are actually eating it.
Okay, I'll take that. What else? Anybody else who want to give it a try? And don't worry about the right and the wrong answer. It's just, I just want to kind of prick your brain to say that, to then come to the next point that I want to talk about.
Perhaps mothers who had gone through experiences of pregnancy and had challenges, they were able to support more mothers in the community with how to take care of nutrition of the children, prenatal and postnatal.
No, not really. This is a family where their kids were fully nourished, so they did not have that kind of a support system. They were on their own. But why they were flourishing, even despite that they were poor. So anybody else who wants to try?
Maybe the balance of nutrients in the meal.
You're close to the answer, yes. So see, what happens is, what happened was
nutrition.
No, the rice and the sweet potato was as much as they provided, right?
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, there was a misconception in the minds of that community, that very poor families, that if you feed shrimps and crabs and everything else to a small kid, it is not good for them because it comes from an area in their ponds which are infested with all the poisonous elements. So because of this perception and this extreme belief, the children were only fed sweet potatoes and rice. But what the mothers did, being a mother, she challenged herself, saying that no, while this is actually nutrition and I eat it, let me just put it into my child's meal and let's see what happens. And what the result they got is what their children were actually getting nutritious every single day. They were born nourished, and they were growing as nourished kids, right? And the second thing is that they realized that because our children are small, their stomachs are very small. So we need to feed them smaller portions, but maybe multiple portions in a day, so that the small stomachs can digest those food. Now, this research, this finding, data could not capture. This finding happened only when people went into the space, into the field, to live with those communities, to figure out their lifestyle and their way of eating. So then what they did was, they got these mothers to conduct cooking sessions for these malnourished families and teach them and train them on how to do it. Basically saying local solutions to local problems. Yeah. So that is how it worked. Now my next point, what I'm trying to actually now will actually justify what I just said, is that don't get hooked to a perception or a belief of, if you don't do this, that will not work. If you do this, this will not work. 2020 really taught us that you have to be resilient. Your thought process you have to keep shaking your thought process. What you believed, you have to unlearn. And those who unlearned a lot in 2020 are successful today, even as nonprofits. And therefore, when I used to talk to people earlier, people used to say, oh, I have a CP money of 5 crores, 20 crores, 70 crores. Where is your retail money? Oh, retail is a very small business. I don't need it. Yeah, that was the perception. I need big check writers. I need people who write bigger checks for me. I don't need who writes a 10 rupee check or a 100 rupee check. Not realizing that this 100 rupee is more resilient because these retail donors are more sympathetic to you in troubled times. It's a natural human tendency, right? If you are having a COVID and you did an ask, didn't you not get money? You got money, right? Most of us got money who did it the right way, right? I can't see the heads nod, but I'll assume you're nodding your head.
Yes,
we all
you're
did
right.
very well. So we all did very well because of that. I did very well. That is only because I unlearned a lot of things. And now I want to take this conversation to the next level of my point, which is trying to shift, give you a food for thought, where I will just tell you how you can shift your thinking to a design thinking format to actually help your organization. How can you bring design thinking into non-profit sector to actually design your approach towards problem solving? In simple terms, basically design thinking is nothing but a very structured framework for understanding and pursuing innovation for solving user problems. And in this case, it's our donors. Okay, it is it's the ability to solve the complex problems in the most easiest way through research, through problem defining. We as Indians and anybody, we don't spend much time, even in the non-profit sector, spend time on problem kya hai. We spend solution kahan hai. And we are so short-sighted about that, right? We want to make 1 million today. We don't want to make 10, 100,000 millions tomorrow, right? So that is one thing we need to be very careful about. Are we spending enough time in defining our problems? Donor paisa nahi de raha hai, ye hamara problem hai. But wo kyun nahi de raha hai? Why is he not giving? What is the reason? Where am I going wrong? Where my organization is going wrong? Where our communication is going wrong is not what we are wanting to spend time. Because as a fundraiser, communication is not my, area, right? The other, only raising funds is my area. No, you have to take it holistically. So when you add design thinking, what you do is the design thinking ability makes you sensitizes you to be more compassionate towards your donor. It allows, and because understand compassion, the word compassion means communal. It's more communal. It's involving everybody, right? And passion is only an individual. Lipika can be passionate about cry. That doesn't help my donors. I being passionate doesn't help the donor. What helps the donor is he being compassionate towards my cause. So the idea is to turn your cause into a compelling reason, what Reena said, into a compelling reason to donate. And design thinking actually helps you define those things in your mind and in your approach towards the whole problem solving. That is one part of it. For example, I'll give you my example. When I started doing storytelling to my donors, I'm pretty good at that. I'm sorry. So what happens is when you do the storytelling, you're talking to the other person, and then you're realizing when you're doing the storytelling what is working and what is not working in my story. Yeah, because you're able to see that. And when you see that, you're able to fine tune that. How I learned it? I learned it through the approach of design thinking. And that's exactly what I'm just trying to say to all of you as fundraisers. Try to read up, try to attend seminars, try to take courses on design thinking, because that's really the way forward to fundraising and to changing your approach to everything that you do. Not only doing it in the way that is right. And, again, it's all about researching. I'll lay it down for you. And somewhere Reena also mentioned it. Researching, problem identifying, then doing a conception about it, then coming into what is called prototyping, and then testing it. And in 2020, what Cry America did, and what I did with Cry America is that we were stuck. In March, we were stuck. Oh my God, what's happening? We are not able to do anything. We can't go out, we can't meet people, we can't do events on ground. What are we doing? That's exactly when design thinking came into help, and we did multiple prototyping of lot of ideas, be it online fundraising, be it online virtual galas. I've never done it ever before, but I was superbly successful at that because I tried it, and it paid off. Then we did something called virtual Antakshri for our donors to keep them engaged. Again, there was a fee, there was a fundraising around it also. We did something called virtual, virtual superstar kids, which is basically engaging the donors' children, the community's children, to come and engage in an activity wherein we are not losing touch with our donors during the COVID time. We are also telling them that we are thinking about you during this time while you're thinking about us and giving us the funds, right? So you thought about community engagement. You became passionate. As a fundraiser, we are only chasing money. And then the only two things we do most organizations do is send them the receipts and do once a year thankathon calls, thanking the donors. But you're not even interacting with the donors to know what they want from you. You think what they want is what you're giving them, but that's absolutely a myth. So you have to relive your experience of your organization in a way that is more meaningful to the donor than to you. Because finally, he's writing the check. Finally, he's the one who's actually giving you the money, right? And the best part about retail donors is that they are not like corporates. They don't dictate your policies. They don't dictate your agenda in the programs, right? They just need two things from you. Can they trust you with their money? And are you transparent enough to show them where the money is going? That's all they need. So everybody will agree with me, but that has been my experiences. So that is all I'll say for this for now. And coming to the strategies, what I would say is that in terms of strategies, what has worked for Cry-America in 2020 with COVID, during pandemic, and now post-pandemic is that we have constantly invented ourselves. We have constantly gone through shifts of personal growths, personal learnings, to bring it on the table to say, while at one stage innovation, creativity also gets stagnant, what is the next thing you can do? That is prototype, test, prototype, test. So what has happened is whatever I prototyped and tested in 2020, I'm going to make it into a bigger event in 2021 for the ones that have worked for us. So you understand that 2020 actually is helping me to launch more fundraising pads or revenues of channels of fundraising in 2021, because I kind of prototyped, I kind of, tested it. And therefore, somebody asked about how do you convince the board? See, once you have something of testing that you have done and proven record of success, even if it's a sample testing, you have a case to make. And people would like to know that whether investing that kind of human resource, the entire organization's capability into this piloting, into this program is valid or not through the prototype that you do. Yeah. So that is all I would say. There are many other things yes, auctions is what I tried. I do very successful auctions also. Again, it has evolved over the years. The first year it bombed because I was prototyping, but then that told me that there is a market for it. It's just that I don't know how to do it. So therefore, self-learning and everything got me going, and now I do almost $80,000-$90,000 in just through my auctions. Yeah. And regarding monthly, yes, monthly is one very sustainable piece, sustainable channel for any nonprofit to have. Monthly donors are they are the best green to keep it in the fridge for your life, I would say, because with the monthly donors, the best part is their giving is constant. The only ask I will have from all of you as fundraisers would be, do not give this base at all to your telecallers to call. It will never work. You as a CEO, you as a GM, you as a AGM, you as a VP, whoever it is, I think they should call, because the reason is, this is a base which you want to sustain for a long time, right? You want to make sure that they give you their checks every month on month through ECS or payroll giving or employee giving or whatever forms. Then you, because you're more refined in a way that you know the organization, you know the mission, you know the vision, you know how to talk, you know what to talk, you are in a better space to engage with that base and bring that creative conversation into a productive outcome, rather than a calling and really screwing up that lead for you. Yeah. Or else you need to have a telecalling team who you have trained and are supervising very, very closely. Because I'll tell you from my experience, monthly giving, as Reena said, is very, very difficult to retain. But my retention is 99%. 1% is absolutely normal because that's the life cycle of a donor thing. But my retention is 99% only because me and my team put in our personal time, effort into it, rather than going to an agency. Going to an agency is a very easy solution to the problem. But understand, agencies do have a limitation on their recruitments, the kind of recruitments they do, the level of understanding they have about your cause. And they're not only calling your cause, they're calling multiple other charities' cause, right? So the passion doesn't come through, the commitment doesn't come through. So you have to actually define which are the ones you want to kind of give to anybody or want to do it yourself, whatever. Shall I, it's getting, is it getting boring, or am I making some sense?
No, Lipika, I think the chat box is there's a comment from Ashish saying it's a great teaching from Lipika. But any questions for Lipika from the group here? you might just want to raise your hand. But while that's happening, just a quick check. See, we all mentioned, I mean, you did mention that you need to have retail fundraising, but is there some thumb rule in terms of what is the percentage contribution that should be retail? Is there something that an organization should fund for?
Yes, absolutely. But if I go by the last, not just the last year, I think I'll take the last year's data, because last year is not a data to take because there was a lot of fluctuations around. So America, in the America market, because I look after the America market, so I'll put that as a reference point. In the US, charities raised almost $410 billion in 2019. And that was, and out of that, almost 70% was retail and 5% was only corporate. 19% was foundations and stuff like that. But that 70% says a volume to you, right? And let me tell you, these retail donors, Santosh, are the most sympathetic to you. They are ready to live with you as loyal donors for as long as your shop shuts down, right? It's all about engaging with them in a way that is meaningful, not only to you as an organization, but to them as an individual as well.
Right. It comes to the point where Sachin mentioned that 10,000 donors, 700 rupees, and that's quite huge, right? So
absolutely, and make your moments of your experience into a movement. Make it into a movement than more than a moment. Make your let your organization be a movement, right? And therefore give that experience of that movement to the donor. Like I'll tell you one example of how do people relate their case stories to donors to say, okay, we have a child in this project and he did very well and today he's going to school. Earlier he was a child labor and he did this and he did that and we got him going. When I read this now, because of my design thinking, way of thinking, I find it, oh my God, I'll never give money to this. Why should I give money? Because I'm not getting a sense of how do you do, what do you do? Everybody is ready to jump to conclusions to say we reached a success. He was a child labor, I got him out and today he's doing that. But who's explaining the approach? How did you get him out? Because people, as donor, they are interested to know that because that is where they see a value of their money being used.
Sure.
So those are the things to keep in mind when you do even communication with your donors. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ripika. I think a lot of takeaways for the audience. So with this, I think we will move in. We request Reena Soni to come on. So Reena is actually spent a lot of time. She's got 25 years of work experience, out of which she's spent there about 18 years in the corporate world in the financial services space. So she understands finance really, really well. She joined Oxfam India and to head their fundraising function in 2014 and is currently the director of their public engagement vertical. She is leading public engagement and steering the organization to utilize collective skills and knowledge across all areas of the organization, campaigners, communications, fundraisers to bring large scale and the power of Oxfam in influencing and engaging fundraising. So we all know the way Oxfam functions. That's also kind of very, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would want to learn from that. So I would have a presentation. Do you want me to share that, Reena, or do you want to do it?
I feel for the kind of questions that are coming, I would like to take a little different take and use the presentation because I feel so. Many of you, when I'm reading the chat box, you are trying to ask questions that, for example, I run this, charity, etc. in a particular state, etc. How do I raise funds? So I wanted to, just talk about something, and maybe this is worth exploring for each one of you. If you were to look at, the individual retail giving, and if we were to classify the personas of people, those who give. So if we were to look at, there is this study, which classified the various personas of individuals who give. So there is one persona which I feel is a very, very important one, and for people around this call and that they can resonate with that there is a persona and it was classified as a hometown hero. So who is this hometown hero? This was a person who grew up in a small town, say in a non-metro kind of a place, and because of his education, etc., he moved out of that place and now is doing really well in life. I feel like for organizations, many organizations around this call, those who have grassroots programs in these particular areas, if we can identify and we can find out that for this hometown hero, what is the motivation? The motivation is a sense of obligation to take care of his community and make them feel proud. And this urgent emotional thing that he feels for his particular thing. So if we can find out programs and you can find out channels that can support this or that specific concerns, from those specific geographies, they will connect, with you. So how we can target these professionals who are from this and then pitch our programs to them. So bring together, people who have achieved in life. So I'll just give you some examples. We can draw some parallels here for this also. So I'll go back to my insurance, days when we were supposed to hire and recruit agents, and we felt that agents, those who come from a certain ethnicity like the Gujarati, etc., were doing really well for us. So what we did, we tried to reach out to various Gujarati Samaj, etc., and we started doing programs along with them and reaching here. So similarly, if for example you have programs running, say in Chhattisgarh, let's try to find out, and look at various organizations, etc., where these people come together, and then go and pitch to this particular set of group of people about your programs. Your programs will be really, they will be really able to identify, because the touch and feel is going to be there. So maybe for all of us, sometimes retail fundraising looks very fascinating, but it is very important for us to carve a niche for ourselves. And here I just want to add a little thing. Though Lipika mentioned that retail giving in the US%, but in India, what Sachin was mentioning, the Satwa report says, though retail, people do give to charities, but most of them are in nature of religious giving. And what it leaves for the others is a very small portion. So we all have to be cognizant of that. Otherwise, at times we become really, really, gung-ho about this. And then when we venture into that path, we realize that. So this was one thing that I wanted to share. The other thing that I wanted to share with all of you was, when we are venturing into the retail fundraising space, take your time and build your back-end support systems. So when I mean, say, back-end support systems, like Lipika was mentioning, it is very important for us to have defined supporters journey. So it is not easy for us to call everybody. So a best way to do is segmenting your donors. So classifying them, say, a person who is giving me an X amount, and we can have it a platinum donor, a gold donor, a silver donor, a major donor, a regular donor. Then having individual donor journeys carved out for each of this. So for example, for platinum, maybe the CEO of the organization needs to touch base twice. Maybe for a major donor, it is the people, those who are, maybe say my relationship manager or whoever is there in your organization. So it is very important that when we are venturing into this, we have this thing completely, done. Only then will you have these kind of percentages of retention like Lipika is talking. But there also, CRY, I would say, has a very different example. But overall, if you are getting a retention percentage of anywhere between 70% for your regular donors in first, in the first year, as per the Indian, if you were to look at all the peer organizations, it is a good retention percentage to get, gun for. That is another thing that I wanted to share. The other is, it is very important for us to keep these donors updated in terms of what is the work that we are doing. And here I feel that we should take help of professionals who are good in communications and who are able to craft out our messages so that person is able to understand. At times we see that when we are part of smaller setups, it is very program heavy. We have a lot of program people, and the language that the program people talk is not what our donor, and especially a retail donor, will understand. So communications play a very, very important role here. So what is the kind of communication that I am doing with people? You know, making the donor, as I say, the center, the hero. So making, for example, if Lipika has donated, making Lipika as the hero, that Lipika, it is because of your support only that, you know, Oxfam has been able to do that. So always having, you know, this kind of, thing in our communications. Also, as we move into retail fundraising space, why we say it is very resource intensive, because you have to keep, testing and keep retesting. So for example, if I'm sending my donor communication letter with a certain headline, I have to test it, you know, is saying, Reena, you changed somebody's life, or Oxfam changed, which is giving me a better open rate, which is giving me a better, you know, contact rate. All those things have to be, measured. So when we are entering into this back-end system operations play a very, very important role. Also, as people who would be leading this function, it is very important for you to be hands-on. So even, you know, when we have started, say, a new campaign, I will get into call listening sessions, and I will try to, you know, listen to all the calls, you know, couple of sample calls for me to get an idea about what is the talk that is happening, what is the donor that they are, you know, questions that they are asking. So these are some of the important, steps that I feel that each one of us, you know, who are around this call, especially who are getting into the retail fundraising, need to keep in mind. So I'll just stop here. And yeah.
Santosh, can I add something to this?
Sure, absolutely.
It just because it just came into my mind and I missed talking about it. One more thing that I would like to add for the fundraisers is to explore this concept of major gift giving. This is again a part of retail giving, where individuals, we have found that individuals who are not corporates, but a little below corporates, but a higher on giving, can be grouped into something called major gifts. Yeah, and there is a unique way of handling that base. These are retail base only, but there is a way to handle that base. And how do you therefore, give them the customer experience, the donor experience, and then what are your SLAs? You have to set, like with a corporate, you have to set an SLA, like an agreement on deliverables. What are your deliverables? Because these donors are usually and a company can define who is my major gift. For example, in CRY, CRY America, we have like a $5,000 donor is a major gift for us, right? Somebody who's writing a $5,000 check. So can we put him in a different bucket and then create a customer experience around him to give him that niche that we don't usually give to regular retail donors. Because then you also need that higher bucket also, which is not corporate, but coming as retail, but still is a bigger check writer. So that is something, if you guys can explore, that is a huge, basically instead of running after 10 retail donors, it's that one donor who is equivalent to that 10 donors, donation amounts, and therefore a big check writer to me. So that's also a very interesting area where you should spend that time.
Sure. Any inputs from the participants at this point? Please raise your hand and feel free to join in. But very, very critical point, very, very important point, Reena, in terms of having your communication strategy right. And the whole donor recognition is so important for people to feel connected to your organization. Yes, Crispino.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, this is an excellent set of presenters as well as points that have been placed. I was wondering if you all could share with us your contact details. So in case we need to touch base with you for advice or, seek some guidance on how to do things, whether you would be open to that. And so if the organizers, with the consent of the speakers, could share their contact details, that would be wonderful.
Sure. I'll speak on behalf of the panelists. Everyone is on LinkedIn, so I think that is now a very common way to reach out. So do feel free to connect. And Sachin has already shared his email ID, so feel free to reach out to him as well. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Nachiket.
There
Yes.
is this question that is being asked where it is asked whether we should have a mix of external and internal and what is the right mix. So here
Right.
my recommendation is, and you can look at it, always keep your retention in-house. You acquire these donors with a lot of sweat and blood, with a lot of money, retain and don't give it to that retention. That is one. And I would say, in case you are a smaller organization, rather than setting up the entire thing in-house for fundraising, always better to go small with a small agency, see what are the value propositions that are working, learn from those, and then start building an in-house team as well. Nothing beats in-house. But yes, it requires investment, it requires a lot of commitment, and it will be at least a 5-year kind of a horizon. It will not happen that you're going to put 100 rupees today, and if you're building a regular portfolio, tomorrow you will get it over a period of 5 years time, that too with all these things put in place right. Because our banking systems, etc., are also like that you don't have systems that exist in the other markets, where if somebody signs you for a regular donation, he signed you for life. Because our banking systems and our regulations are like that, people have to sign NASH, they come through credit cards get expired, they go off. So keeping all those things in mind.
Sure.
Just
Thanks.
to add to what Reena said, now I'm at the other side of the table. I worked with organizations for a long time. So I would say that, of course, in-house, if you can afford to invest in in-house, absolutely do that. And if not, look for agency where people have worked in organizations and will understand your DNA as well. And not just run the show as a typical direct marketing, sale unit. So that's what I would suggest.
Thanks, Sachin. Now, Nachiket, you want to ask something?
Yes, yeah. So hi, Rina. So you talked about one second. Yeah, Rina. You talked about informing your donor and keeping them informed about your what you are doing and what is happening in the programs. So sometimes it happens that the donors, like they have told us, they feel that we are spamming them with the we are spamming them with their mails, and they get lots and lots of mails, so that is why they unsubscribe. So is there any a right mix, at what intervals we should then keep them informed or engage them?
So Nachiket, what we follow, and we have a contactability matrix developed, where, for example, if I have, so there is a monthly newsletter which has to go. So if somebody has opened that newsletter, I will remove them from the list. I will do a repeat thing for non-openers. So that is how you have to, define it. So you'll have to sit and look at, what are the various touch points, and you will have to, I feel, define in terms of when are you touching them, when are you not. So for our standard case, it is a monthly communication that we send them. And then we do send a repeat communication to non-openers. And depending, then if the person has moved into telecalling, and if we have made an ask to that person, then we are not going to touch that person for another 6 months. That data will lie dormant with us. So that's why I say there's a lot of thing that goes in the back end that is very, very, important for building retail fundraising. I hope I was able to answer your question.
Right.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Neha.
Nachiket, sorry, just to add also the email open rates, if Reena or Lipika or George can tell, usually it was anywhere in the range of about 3 to 7% for us. So, I mean, if you're reaching out to 10,000 people, hardly 3 or 5% of the people are actually opening the mail. So the open rates have actually dropped drastically over the last few years. We should also be looking at engaging with donors with technologies, I mean, with tools such as WhatsApp. If you can use, because people usually open their WhatsApp messages and they might not like a lot of unread messages on WhatsApp, but they don't mind having like thousands of emails not being read and all that. So use technology, use new tools where people are actually accessing it, and also it will not be a bad idea to do a very survey from maybe a set of people who are your donors to understand how regularly they would like to be contacted and what is the mode of communication they would prefer. The more crisp your communication is, the better it is. Nobody likes reading long emails or attachments or big reports. Simpler bullet points, key impact that you have been able to do with your money really helps. That is something that worked with us for our previous organizations.
Sure. Thanks, Sachin. And so I would now request George to come in. Just a quick introduction George leads the strategy, operations, and campaigns at United Way Mumbai, which is a not-for-profit. It's got a huge footprint in both urban as well as the rural communities across the country. United Way Mumbai invests close to 480 crores in the areas of education, health, income, environment, public safety, and social inclusion. About George, he's got about 18 years of experience in both corporate and development sector, and he also spearheads India's largest philanthropy sporting event, which all of us know and many of us would have participated. That is the Mumbai Marathon. Under his leadership, the marathon has actually grown to be a 45 crore annual fundraising platform and brings together over 200 companies, 300 NGOs, and over 1,500 fundraisers every single year. So he's got a huge interest in building this space, and we look forward to this interesting perspective from you, because digital has clearly changed the economics of retail fundraising significantly. So over to you, George, just to take your perspective.
Thank you, Santosh. Fascinating to hear from Sachin, Lipika, Reena. I think I might be an anomaly here, so I need to qualify that. So I need to give you a tiny brief about United Way Mumbai, and I'll tell you why I might be an anomaly here. We've been around for 20 years now. Today we raise around 150 crores. But 5 years back, we had nobody in our fundraising team. We didn't have a fundraising team. Today we have 3 people, and that is it. And so as far as lean and mean teams go, they might just be the embodiment of that. But the United Way model may not be the right example, because we are diversified. We are into most of it is corporate. There is a lot of grant making. Payroll giving is very large at our end. So that's 10,000 odd people every year on the employees of various companies or on payroll giving. Employee engagement is a major part. What I would like to concentrate on is the Mumbai Marathon and the exposure of that provides us on retail. Because retail as such, and the Mumbai Marathon, like Santosh mentioned, raises around, apart from the United Way amount, 47 odd crores, 300 NGOs, 200, all of that. Retail is fairly large and complex, and most of the time I speak to all these NGOs, and there's two main problems. Most of it highlighted already. One is it is resource intensive. There is an amount of investment one must be prepared to put in to do this right, and as a source one cannot ignore it. But most organizations struggle with this because they have a small fundraising team, or they may not even have a team. It is a person or a founder or a set of people who are trying to manage a lot of things, of which this is part of it. And retail is not just face to face, right? It could be Facebook fundraising, it could be points, credit card points, it could be affiliate marketing, it could be those donation box in the shops, it could be there is a whole gamut of retail. Is essentially large number of people, smaller ticket size or amounts or donations. And how do we, the second problem with retail that organizations challenge, it's not problem that organizations would face, is donor management. like rightly pointed out by Reena, the communication to donors, especially, and there's also one unique situation that we have in India, that is trust in or suspicion about NGOs, or by and large, it is prevalent, and we willingly give to for religious purposes. But when it comes to NGOs, there are all kinds of excuses or uncertainty or suspicion, or where will my money go? How will I know? All of that comes into play, and it is essential to. And it is not truly a valid suspicion, because it becomes so easily, and there's no organization in India, a valid, credible organization, who will not be happy to explain anything to any donor or invite them over. So it's not a real valid thing, but we must know that it exists out there. So it's what I call essentially a philanthropic maturity of people, that at the base of that is low trust, wherein even if you're giving a biscuit packet, we'll want to open it and give it, so that there is no misuse, because I don't trust where I'm giving it, to a level of a very mature donor who's giving unrestricted funds and letting the organization build capacity. So in that scale of being in the retail segment, is that people of differing levels of philanthropic maturity, which we need to slowly, systematically push them on to a higher level. And it is essentially building of trust. And trust, like everybody mentioned, can be built in various ways. I think you have to be passionate about it. You have to believe in it, and people essentially give to people. And I want to explain that. Sanjay, you are on. Okay, thank you. So I wanted to explain the Mumbai Marathon in that context, and what I've seen over these many years. And I've seen organizations go from zero to raising multiple crores now. And what we've tried to push and promote is, and it is, if there is a silver bullet to manage retail, this could probably aid, because there's very little investment, there is no cost in fact, and there is a high return, and you are able to crack, especially if you're a small organization. That is not to say that every avenue available to an organization should not be explored. I'm just going from the perspective of organizations which don't have the resources, are not able to immediately jump into retail. And this is possibly one way, and that is crowdfunding. And crowdfunding, not in the sense that is commonly understood. There are so many crowdfunding platforms today. All of them are now at 0 platform fee, and they offer a great option. And for a certain amount of money, they will even market and help you with their social media strategy and moving out, etc. And in that sense, but essentially what that requires you to do is to you create the story and the narrative around what you're trying to raise funds for. Then you reach out to your network and try and get individuals to support that, and using this platform, and the platform provides some level of credibility. The platform provides you reach. It's digitally managed. You don't have to meet anybody. You just need to make sure. Our approach is slightly different. In the Mumbai Marathon, what we tried to do in all these years is to concentrate on individual fundraisers. So here, if I as an organization don't have the resources to do that, to reach out or have the marketing skills or the ability to reach out to a large universe of people, especially when I don't have a large database myself. I have exhausted them, I've emailed them, so what I need to be essentially doing is find one person or a few people who are willing to raise funds for my cause. And that is where the game changes. Because, for taking an example, me, if I was to support a cause, and taking one channel on LinkedIn, I have approximately 3,000 odd people. If I was, and there are 3 qualities, before I jump into that, the 3 things that you want in that individual. The first is non-negotiable. The other 2 are good if you have it. First is that person must be willing to ask. And willing to ask on behalf of your organization, and you are never able to ask unless you're convinced about the cause. So that's a natural fallback of the willingness to ask. Second is, if you're afraid of asking, you're ashamed of asking, if you're uncertain about how to, and you can't handle that rejection that will inevitably follow in some parts, then that is probably not a good mindset to approach this. The second is, you should have a network, any network, set of people that you can reach out to. And the third is you should have personal goodwill. And if these three qualities come together, and I've seen 6,000 individual fundraisers over these years, and I've seen the ones who are excellent year on year, and I've seen people who raise 5,000 rupees, I've seen people who raise 5 crore rupees. So there is a whole chain of people, and I see people who do it every year and people who burn out in the first year and can't do that again. So if you have these three qualities, I'm going now back to my example. If I was convinced by my organization to raise funds for my organization, I have a network. I have LinkedIn. I have, like I said, 3,000 odd people. Now I may or may not reach out to all 3,000. Even if I reach out to 50 people, these are 50 new individuals that I can bring to the organization. I create awareness about it because I'm going to ask, and my personal relationship and my goodwill is attached to my ask. So when I reach out to my parents, my friends, my relatives, and I tell them, there is this organization that, and they do this work, and this is what I want, and I truly believe in their work, and this is what I want to support, and this is where you can come in and help. I'm transferring a lot of goodwill, my own personal credibility gets taken care of because they know me, and I would not have come across if I do not truly believe in it. One, they know about the organization. Second, they believe it is a trusted source. Third, they feel there is the credibility to the ask is established because it's harder to refuse me. It's easier to refuse an organization. When you if United Way Mumbai or somebody sends a mail, you can ignore it. But you can't really ignore me. And there is a whole session on how to do fundraising more effectively at an individual level. But essentially, if I do it personally, if I do it face-to-face, fantastic. Over phone, it's harder to ignore. People want to support me, and the way and manner in which I ask is a huge, it also solves a lot of things from the NGO side. The entire onus of managing the donor shifts from the NGO to the individual fundraiser. I know these people I got money from, right? I am obligated now to keep them informed as to how these monies were spent, how it was utilized. All the NGO needs to do is manage me and make sure that I am equipped in every manner possible to reply credibly to all my donors. And the NGO's effort now is not those 50 people that I brought in. It is to manage me, make sure that I am integrated, embedded, supported, made to feel valuable for the organization, that I've turned into a champion for the organization, and not for 1 year, for every single year that will come, that you will do this every year. And if possible, at some point, even leverage me to the extent that I can bring in other fundraisers. I will recommend, bring in my donors. I will bring them to the organization. So without seeing a program, which is the trust index that I was, the strongest proof of anything is when a donor experiences the project or the work directly. Those are moving moments. Even when we do payroll giving, or whether we do monthly giving, or all of those, employee volunteering is a major part of it, because when a person is able to see the work, that is when you get a true convert. Otherwise, it stays theoretical. It's the onus is so much on the organization to keep people informed, and reporting is a nightmare because there are that many people. So in the Mumbai Marathon, there are around 15,000 people who donate every year, individuals. As United Way, my responsibility is only to provide them an ETG, and that's about it. Because the whole onus of maintaining this pool of 15,000 people rests with these 1,500 fundraisers, which rests with those 200 odd NGOs who have these fundraisers. And that is the chain, and that works out at a win-win. So, and it is sustainable. There is zero cost. It works in the context of the marathon, because for a fundraiser also there is an incentive. So it's a gamified system. So as you raise more funds, you get more privileges, more incentives, more stature in the event, and all of that. So the NGO doesn't need to manage the fundraiser also as much. So it's a working condition, workable win-win. But it's not necessary you have to do it through the marathon, or it could be any crowdfunding site. It has to be a good, strong program at your end, which creates these champions. And these individuals need not be celebrities, CEOs at all. We have seen extremely successful fundraisers who are children, who are board members, who are staff members, who are beneficiaries of the organization as well. Of course, a person, if you have a CEO or or a big businessman or a celebrity, it's even better. But that's not your restraining point. And the other thing is that you don't need to start very big. There are many examples I can give, where people have just concentrated 1 or 2 people this year, and not even large targets, smaller targets, 1 lakh rupees between all of this. This is what we'll do. Next year, they've increased that to 3 people, 5 people, 10 people. And over a period of time, it's a small pool of people that you are constantly investing in and building. And now there are organizations with over 100 fundraisers every single year. And you get to that gradually. But this is the option, which is the low cost option, way of breaking into a large pool of people. Because the problem that I face when most NGOs I speak to is that where will we find these donors? I don't have these access to these people, and it's a simple, straightforward question. Also, people ask me about whether it is company or how do you get, I don't know these people. How did you get to know these people? The simple answer is you may not know the person directly, but you may know somebody who knows somebody who know somebody who know that person. And you have to be investing in that route. Will you approach the person and say, will you be able to connect me to that person with a recommendation, and so on. So in a nutshell, this is an option, which is the lowest cost, easiest way. That is not to say that one does not explore. You must have a diversified pool. You can't depend on a few HNI donors. It is great to have that. You must even consider legacy giving. People write their in their will to the organization. Can you build those? But depending on the stage that and structure that is possible within your organization and the resources you are able to, create a roadmap and try all of this. And this also you must consider as an option to expand your retail pool. Apart from this, do all the tie-ups, whether it is with Paytm, Google Pay, whatever, UPI payments. It's not small money. We tied up on all of these, and it's surprising. Every month, a lot of money comes in. People tend to donate. It may be anonymous income because you don't get enough details about your donors, but this is a pool of money that comes in. And one last point about monthly giving, like what Sachin said, Lipika, it is the most reliable, steady stream of funds. It's difficult to do it very well, but if you invest in that, that is going to be a great source of income for you as an organization in a sustainable way, and it's a steady, stable. If you can do that very well. The problem with payroll giving, since we do that with these many companies, is that it's an attrition model. People will sooner or later leave the organization, and to do payroll giving right is not as simple. There is a lot of investment one must do because you don't have full access to those individuals directly. You're going via a company, and the company may or may not allow certain things. And if you do nothing, within 3 years, payroll giving will be from these 10,000 people that I mentioned will be zero. You have to constantly keep working on building those programs. So yeah, retail is a very vast subject, and I'll just stop here with that one recommendation about how to do it cheaply.
Yeah, we started off. So retail fundraising has so many segments, and maybe while we've heard different perspectives how to approach it, I think every organization needs to find probably their niche or somewhere they can start, because you can't do everything together, and of course communication is key to engage the donor and to get them to understand your journey, right? That is something that's just, but very, very curious to understand, because even personally I get these Flipkart super coins, and they have the option to convert to Give India voucher. So how difficult or how easy is it for the organizations to plug into this system? How can they do this?
So you're referring to the point system?
No, I'm talking to anything. You mentioned Flipkart, Amazon, and Paytm.
Yes, yeah. So it's like all things, with whether it is with companies or it is a relationship that one has to build and create. In that they are open to it. There are many of these point systems is outsourced to different agencies. So for different cards, Citibank, HSBC, ICICI, there are different agencies which curate these gifts at the catalog for, and then they want to have a range of things. And there's a slight nightmare on the ATG front to how to convert your points into an ATG receipt for the individual. Otherwise, all of this becomes anonymous income. But that is a process. And if I were to think back about our Amazon tie-up with Paytm, Google Pay, a lot of this has happened actually during the COVID time, because they were looking for organizations, and in that one sense, United Way, Give India have an edge, because we are cause neutral in that sense that we encompass a lot of, so that is the small edge. But that's not to say Oxfam doesn't have it, or Habitat will not have it. They will also have that, because their reputation is a big deal for these platforms. So for a small organization, it might be a little hard. I'm not saying it, there's no definite in this, I'm not the expert in this. It might be a little hard to break into large tie-ups like these, because they are very concerned about credibility, how it's perceived, whether their users, their people will feel comfortable. I know of one instance with Amazon where they had to remove one organization, very large organization, because of governmental flack on, the government does have a say with these large organizations that, perceived as slightly different, and they had to do it. So,
Right.
but
Right.
tying up with everybody and even small people, like cause marketing is a large area, whether it's a t-shirt seller or and whether it's HUL, anybody, Nanikali does it. So if you can tie up with these, that the proceeds of your sales will go to a cause, that is a very common methodology used by everybody, but all of it requires work in building up that equation, that relationship, that the closeness, that assurity that all these funds would be used in X manner. How is the system going to operate? Also, very importantly, how will the ATG system work in all, especially when there are small donors? So.
Thank you. And a quick reminder to all the panelists that we'll be wrapping up in the next 5 to 10 minutes. If you have any questions, this is the time to ask. And while we're waiting, I always had this question. This is my person. So there is this, whichever NGO page, and this is a question to everyone. Okay, whichever NGO page that we go to, you have a donate now. Okay. How effective is that? Does that really work? And how can you make that work? And how can you build your own payment collection? Or because the trust building that you spoke about, George, that comes into play. So people are now entrusting more into larger organizations or like Give India and yourself. So they know that, okay, the due diligence of the NGO is done. But how can an NGO make that donate now button work is something that I would like to pick your brains on.
So here what you need to do is you have these payment aggregators. So for example, like organizations like CC Avenue and all. You have to sign an agreement, etc. Then they give you APIs, and that is integrated by the person who will be doing your website, and that's how your account will get activated. And when you're talking about how to make that work, etc., like how do you promote that? That is a very different exercise where we say it is like search engine optimization, where you have to optimize this so that you start increasing traffic on your website. But I think for people around the organizations that are around this call, even if they just get this link and activated, and it's not much, whoever has developed a website, they can reach out to them, and you have when you enter into agreements, simple, they sell it, the work of the organization, like I'm talking about CC Avenue, ya PayU, ya ye Razor Pay karke aate hain, ye sab
Right.
But I would say for the mid-size and for the big, large organizations, spending that kind of effort on SEO and SEM.
That doesn't make sense. Yeah. That doesn't make sense. But just to get the donate button there, so that in case there are some people, that's what you just need to do.
Yeah.
So also on the
sorry, go ahead, George.
So there is a, I mean, Dana Mojo is there, which will do all this integration part if you can't go through the paperwork of getting, and there are other crowdfunding sites which also kind of offer this embedding, including if you don't have the technical expertise to embed the API into your organization, because ideally a system should be able to take care of all of it. Reconciliation, your ability to send an ATG instantly, your tracking, your reconciliation with your accounts, all of that. The main challenge of that is it is effectively depends on your website traffic. How do you attract? You can have that button. It will be very. It is an essential thing. You cannot not have a donate button. If somebody wants to take an action, and it is a compelling. It has to be within the flow of your how you envisage the traffic on your website to flow, and ultimately that is the action button that everybody should go to, and then you can do the rest. So having that button is an essential thing. How to attract people to that, to your website, to your work, to your, that is a communication job. And whether it is through your emailers, through your storytelling, through your social media handles, you have to try and get people to take that action on your website, whether through emailers or otherwise. And you can, like Sachin was mentioning, whether WhatsApp is a very strong channel to be able to do it. Emailers open rates are terrible. Even some of it is structurally, because Google will immediately put it into their promotional this thing, which nobody really opens, and they're sitting there with the junk. And to be able to get this effective, if you're getting open rates about 20%, you are doing a fantastic job, depending on the size of your. But the challenge will be just this, getting people to that donate button.
Just to add to what George, Reena, Lipika has shared, apart from the payment gateway, I would suggest a lot of organizations or people who are participating here take the freedom to go to some of the top 10, 15, 20 organizations that you really think are doing amazing and have good communications and all that. Go to their website, look at the landing pages, and pick up what you feel would be the best that you really like, and ask if you don't have a proper committed resource, get an intern, some help, and build a landing page which really looks cool and very clear. So when somebody comes onto the landing page, they should be clear of, okay, this is the ask, what I'm going to donate for. So we really did research on a lot of landing pages of many organizations in India, globally, and then maybe tried to pick the best from each and every one, and then created something of our own. So that really works. So because it's not a copyright information, so take that creative liberty to copy, if it helps your cause.
But one word of caution, Sachin, I would like to give to the audience here is that while you look at various sites, always ensure that while you are in the social sector, your donors are not. They don't understand the social sector jargons. A lot of these nonprofit make the mistake of writing those really heavy English and very fancy English and the jargons, which is really, who's reading it? It's your donor who has no clue what you're talking. If he doesn't get a clue of what you want, then he's not going to click the donate button, despite the fact that it's there. So make it simple, make it easy, make it short and sweet sentences, so people who are reading it understand. Isko paisa chahiye, paisa do. Instead of ye bol kya raha hai, what is it? Because that's the most times I find donors get confused. So no, after hearing your pitch, they are still asking you, yeah, but what is exactly you want me to do? And then you're thinking, I wasted half an hour talking to him. What have I done? Only confused him. So
let the fundraisers do the writing and talking. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So before I have a share thank you note, and maybe we'll have a photo op as well where everyone can switch on their cameras. So last webinar that we had was around the areas of grant. So one of the feedback that we got was, where can we get these? So what we did is we started a Telegram channel where we capture all the grant related information. We will be also putting it on a website for people who don't have Telegram. I'm just sharing this in the chat window for anyone who is interested to join. It's called the Social Digest. So please feel free to access that. So having said this, thank you so much, Reena, Sachin, Lipika, George. I think it's phenomenal, insightful. The chat box obviously was raving about all the inputs that you've given. I'm sure more and more people will reach out to you. But so thank you so much. and on behalf of everyone present here. So I would request everyone to, if they can, switch their camera on, because we did speak about retail fundraising. I'm sure we'd love to see all the happy faces, and we'll just capture it. Thank you so much. I'll just give me like a minute. Okay. Okay, and maybe like a thumbs up for people who are happy about this. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, some more videos on. Yeah, okay. Thank you. I'll just capture it. Okay, we have multiple participants, so few screens to be captured. Okay, awesome. Thank you once again, and we will keep you posted on future webinars which will be relevant to you. So look forward to your participation. Thank you so much. And we'll share the webinar video as well with all of you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
Bye everyone. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.